right? What we're saying is to responsible cannabis users that consume cannabis in a way that is conducive with their lifestyle and allows them to live happy and healthy, productive lives, but at the same time also puts them at a significant risk every time they get behind the wheel. And so, our position is that what we are trying to do in our first kind of introduction of the problem and the product to the community is first educating the public that there is this problem, right? And a lot of people don't even know that it's a problem. They think that because they live in a medicinal or a recreational state that they don't have to worry about cannabis DUIs. And that in and of itself has been, I would say, a challenge and a learning experience for us to introduce the problem to the cannabis community.
Welcome to episode 28 of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact. Today's episode features Justin Kahn, founder of TruClinic, Behavior Labs, and Reepher. Justin is disrupting the personal liability insurance space. He also does a lot to support fellow entrepreneurs. Justin and I discuss his journey growing up adjacent to the VA system, the process of starting and exiting telehealth company TruClinic, his current endeavors in personal liability insurance, his cat that thinks she's a human, and much more. Here is Justin Kahn on People Are the Answer. Justin, thanks for joining me on People Are the Answer.
Jeffrey, thank you so much for having me.
So happy to have you here. And if you could start off just by telling us, where you're based and what your current role is.
Yeah. So I'm based in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Reepher and also of another company called Behavior Labs.
Got it. Thank you. And what would you say generally motivates you?
Hmm. To try and make an impact on the world in a way in which what my activities are doing bring real benefit to real people.
I like that. Um, and where did you grow up and what was it like there?
Well, kind of grew up all over the United States. My parents got divorced when I was 6, and then my mother remarried a few years later after being a flight attendant for a few years to a man who worked for the VA. And that caused us to move around a fair amount. So I spent most of my formidable years growing up between Shreveport, Louisiana, and a little town called Hookstown, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, before coming to Utah in high school and finished high school out here, and then decided to go to college and just liked it out here, and so I've been here ever since.
Got it. Very nice. So you went to college out there. Where was that?
At the University of Utah.
Awesome. And sounds like that was a good experience.
Yeah, it was a great experience. It was pre 2000 or 2001. Things were a different time back then. I was very fortunate to be involved in political science and economics right around the time that there were, troubles between Bush and Gore in that election. So I was able to kind of get a firsthand view. Learned a lot, and after I graduated college, I decided that I didn't want to do anything in politics or economics, and so I decided to get into sales. And also pursued a music career for a while before landing in real estate and starting a career there.
Got it. Very cool. Well, if you don't mind sharing, what kind of sales were you doing?
Yeah, so I did basically consulting services for individuals that were trying to build real estate portfolios. It was an introduction into working directly with individuals who had real estate portfolios or were looking to build them, and helping them to become more established. That gave me my interest into real estate, and from there I became a real estate agent. Then got certified as a mortgage broker. Then I got into insurance adjusting. And working natural disaster claims adjusters as a natural disaster claims adjuster for multiple companies, and use that to create really a foundation of clientele across the country, both on the agent side as well as on the consulting side.
Got it. So it sounds like you got to experience a lot of different aspects of that industry.
Yeah. And, after 10 years, I decided that it was time to walk away from it because it got stagnant and stale. And that led me on to my next venture, which was starting a company called TruClinic, which was a telemedicine software company before telemedicine was really a thing.
Yeah. Wow. Definitely sounds before its time. And before we dig in, I do briefly want to ask about the music career that you attempted.
So you may be able to still find mixtapes out there of either DJ Kahn or Mr. Kahn. But there was a time in my 20s where I was a DJ that also ran a few nightclubs, did a lot of promotion work, worked for Capitol Records, worked for Sundance, and also traveled throughout the US and South America and up into Canada doing some touring as a DJ. So I did that for my mid 20s, and then woke up one day and said, I don't want to do this as a career. And that led me to kind of start down my entrepreneurial path.
Cool. Yeah. Well, that's still, I'm sure that was a really cool experience. A lot of fun. Got to see some cool things.
Yeah, definitely. Learned a lot about people during that time too.
I'm sure. And so we'll get back on the career path. So you started True Clinic, and it sounds like that was telehealth before it was anywhere near where that is today. What year was that you started True Clinic?
It was in 2009. I'd been thinking about the idea since 2008. My path towards entrepreneurship took kind of a very strange trajectory. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I knew I wanted to do something. I wasn't quite sure what it was. While I was working as a claims adjuster for Hurricane Ike, this was back in 2008, that I happened to read an article that was on a speech that Robert Gates had given to the War College. And he was talking about how the DoD was going to start investing billions of dollars to address the PTSD epidemic that had been plaguing the branches of the military. And I had some kind of unique experiences. One being that I lived in Shreveport on the grounds of the National Air Base at the time that the first Gulf War happened. And then after that, lived on grounds of the VA hospital and saw the results of those kids coming back from war and the type of medical care that they were receiving at the time. I also have an epileptic condition or seizure disorder that was caused by a traumatic brain injury that I had when I was a kid, and the resulting seizures that came out of that were misdiagnosed as having different behavioral health conditions. And so I was constantly in a doctor's office trying to explain panic attacks or anxiety or fear and stuttering and stammering and all these different things to doctors after the fact. And at the time, I remember thinking I wanted a doctor to be able to see what was happening to me in real time. And so all throughout my teens, doctors kept giving me different medications. Everything made it worse. Finally, I quit going to the doctor when I was 20. I started drinking heavily and self-medicating that way. And it was on my 22nd birthday that a friend of mine gave me a cannabis joint and said, "You ever smoked pot before?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why don't you try it?" And I'll never forget it. It was a life changing experience for me because it helped me realize that I could relax, that there was actually a state other than what I knew of this constant sense of anxiety. And so I used cannabis all throughout my 20s, and basically I've used cannabis ever since then as one of the medicines to treat the effects and the symptoms that come from the seizures. So I it wasn't until I was 27 that I had a grand mal seizure, and I've only ever had one, and it was this one time. But it scared me, and it caused me to seek out the help of a neurologist who worked with me for 6 months and figured out that I didn't, in fact, have these conditions that I had been treated for in my teens and 20s. Instead, what I had was a epileptic condition called generalized petite seizures, which are micro seizures. They happen in a fraction of a second. I don't lose cognition, but I sometimes stutter, stammer, forget what I'm saying. Sometimes my hands shake. Sometimes I, like do repetitive patterns. But she put me on an anti-seizure medication, and all those things that I'd been experiencing for as long as I could remember just dissipated. And it was the combination, and it still has been the combination of an anti-seizure medication and cannabis that's really given me my life back and given me the ability to move past whatever limitation I may have that is caused from the seizures. And so when I read this article about what Gates was saying that they wanted to do, it started me to think about my own situation and also my experience and knowledge about what was happening in the VA around that time. So I came back from working Hurricane Ike because it was a contract gig, and I started really kind of working on this idea. And eventually I worked up enough courage to contact the chief of PTSD at the Salt Lake VA and said, "You may remember me, you may not, but I'd like to take you to coffee if you'll give me 15 minutes of your time, and I'd like to talk to you about what I'd like to do." And I pitched an idea of what if you could connect active duty troops with VA providers from their home state and have it happen while they were deployed, but they could communicate with their VA providers through a secure video conference. And it would be outside of the military, but not outside of the DoD. And I won't get into the reasons why that's important, but it was at the time. And the thought was that if we could put something like this in play, that it would get the troops used to the technology, and it would also they would also establish a relationship with the VA providers. So when they transitioned out of theater and were became veteran status, that they would already have that working relationship and would continue to engage with those VA providers. And the VA didn't have anything like that at the time. The doctor said to me, the chief said, "Do you have a technology like that that can do what you're proposing?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Okay, well, if you can, create a technology or find a technology that does what you want it to do, I'll see about giving you a grant." It's like, great. So I went out and thought that finding something off the shelf would be a possibility. It wasn't. I thought that regular web developers would be able to build it. They weren't. It was really advanced stuff at the time. And so eventually I recruited a friend who is a genius engineer to come in and help build the application. And we were able to put something in play where the VA actually gave us a grant to use the technology to test it to see. They were teaching relaxation exercises to a group that did it in person versus the group that did it through the platform, to see if the what the retention rates were like, and the retention rates were actually better for the individuals that did it using the platform. And so that was the genesis for TruClinic, which we then were able to get some additional government grants to do some projects with the Go Shoot Native American tribe. And then that eventually led to raising some angel capital that was really allow us to able to commercialize. And then we focused our efforts on large hospitals and health systems, creating a technology that could be flexible to regardless of whatever the use case or the workflow was. And we're able to take that technology and basically scale it to a global customer footprint and 23 employees. We eventually sold the company to a company called InTouch, and then a year later sold the company to Teladoc.
Got it. Well, I'm sure that was quite the journey. Appreciate you sharing. So you ran it for 9 years before the initial sale. Um, how did the company evolve during that time? What was it like?
Oh, how did it evolve? It evolved in a lot of ways. Originally, we thought that the technology would be used by every healthcare professional across the world. It would be super easy, super cheap. They'd be able to get on and use it. And that failed. And it failed spectacularly because we didn't understand how much training it was going to require and how much maintenance it was, especially for the smaller customers. So that led us that after 2 years of trying, we eventually had to say goodbye to all of our smaller customers and focus on the enterprise, meaning hospitals and health systems, because they had the infrastructure, the support, the budgets, and the scale in terms of both patients and providers. So that really was the impetus for where the company started to have its hockey stick growth moment.
Got it. And did you always hope to sell it, or how did that come about?
Well, I mean, so I'll put it like this: investors always ask you the question, "What's your exit strategy?"
Right.
And my answer at the time was, "I'm not worried about that right now. What I'm trying to do is trying to build a company, get people to use the product, find real value, and become sticky. And once I can do that, then other people are going to see the value that we provide, and there may be an offer coming at some point in the future." I'm an entrepreneur. I like building companies, and there also comes a point where I like selling companies. Like eventually, you can take a company so far, and then you realize that other people have the ability to take it further. And so the fact that my little startup TruClinic is now serving millions of people across the world as part of the global Teladoc infrastructure. I mean, I got to be honest, that makes me feel pretty awesome at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's incredible. Congrats.
Thank you.
And so you spent a year with InTouch as part of that transition. Is that right?
Yeah, oh, yeah, about that.
And then they again sold it. Was that surprising to you, or were you part of that process?
It was not surprising to me. I was not part of that process. I knew that what InTouch was doing, and this was part of the why I sold to them, is InTouch had something that nobody else had, and that was self-driving robots, medical carts, the type of technology that was created by Yulin Wang, who's an amazing individual. But using really state of the art technology to do things that no other telemedicine at the time telemedicine company could do. And they had the acute side of hospitals and health systems. And what TruClinic was doing was it was winning the consumer side of hospitals and health systems, meaning the low access front door, the urgent care, the nurse call line. That's where the TruClinic technology was being used. So InTouch's strategy at that time was what they called whole person care. In fact, Teladoc still calls it that, where they were creating a solution for a hospital and health system that could basically be implemented for every level of care. From low acuity to high acuity, from pediatrics to geriatrics. The joke is from the womb to the tomb, and putting that type of solution in for hospitals and health systems made them step back and say, okay, Teladoc is a partner that can actually help, or InTouch is a partner, and same with Teladoc, that can help us extend our reach in every level of care in every clinic that we have in the areas that we serve. That's a pretty compelling argument.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, that's it sounds like it was a really incredible experience that gave you a lot to work with going forward. And I know you got very engaged in the entrepreneurial scene in your area. And I saw that you were a founding member of Pando Labs.
hmm Yeah, so Pando Labs is a knowledge center, uh, and also I would say kind of a place for entrepreneurs to gather and collaborate, talk about what they're doing, talk about the tools that they use. But really, Pando is an extension of the Silicon Slopes ecosystem, which exists here along the Wasatch Front, to be very founder friendly and also startup friendly, in the sense of making sure that resources are available, and that people in the community are also available to help out where they can.
Yeah, it's great to see when communities really support their entrepreneurs and their endeavors. It goes a really long way.
Yeah, definitely.
And part of your engagement in the entrepreneurial community is I saw you did some, or you've done some instructing at the University of Utah on the business side.
Yeah, so I am adjunct faculty for the David Eccles School of Business, Masters of Business Creation program at the University of Utah. The program is sponsored by Pierre Lassonde, who is a wealthy philanthropist out of Canada and also out of the US. And the program is specifically for startup companies. It's a scholarship only program where the startup company is usually either a single founder or a founding team, and you this program basically provides two things: an accelerator with access to capital, as well as an accredited master's degree, a master's of business creation, which is a modified MBA, but really focuses on the entrepreneur side as opposed to more of the business process project management side. And the focus is to create the next generation of entrepreneurs that are going to give back to their communities.
Got it. Well, gotta love that, and I'm excited and curious to learn about the things that have come out of there.
There have been some very successful companies so far. So the program really focuses on companies that are not necessarily what we would consider to be lifestyle companies, but rather companies that have a pathway towards some sort of significant scale.
Got it. Well, that must be rewarding to be a part of.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's definitely one of the funner things that I get to do, is to help younger entrepreneurs that are just starting the process look at all the problems and all the challenges, and help them sort through it. It's really fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I enjoy similar activities, and I know right now your entrepreneurial focus is behavior labs. If you could, would love for you to just kind of tell me more about what you're doing there.
Yeah, so Behavior Labs is the parent company, and it's based on a premise that my team has as it relates to the personal insurance liability space. So if you think about it, from a professional level, there are all different types of insurance that are out there to spread the risk for the business and the people that operate that business. Things like business operations insurance, directors and officers insurance, errors and omissions insurance, personal license insurance, things like that. On the individual side, it's really kind of a different story. You essentially have your liability insurance that's tied to your renters, homeowners, or your auto insurance. Beyond that, you have the ability to buy what are called umbrella insurance policies, which are basically just general liability that would kick in after whatever existing liability coverage that you have. But it's limited in the things that it does cover, and it doesn't kick in until long after anything else has been exhausted. And then beyond that, you can buy something like a prepaid legal service where you could like talk to a lawyer for a discount or get some discount legal hours, things like that. That's essentially it. And so Behavior Labs comes from the idea that we think that there is a market to create liability insurance products that are tied to individual behaviors as opposed to the traditional model like loss. So the first product that we're bringing to market, and this is one of our sub companies, is a company called Reepher. And what Reefer is it's a legal expense plan for cannabis consumers that covers DUIs. And will eventually expand into additional criminal misdemeanors and additional endorsements that will be coming along the way. So, the basic premise is that an individual pays a minimum of $15 a month. And in exchange for that, if they are charged with a cannabis DUI, then a $15,000 expense plan kicks in to cover all the legal, like hiring a lawyer, and ancillary expenses like getting your car out of tow and impound, time off work, alternative transportation, personal hardship, and incidental expenses. All of that is covered underneath that $15,000 plan.
So you're really disrupting the personal liability insurance space.
Trying to. We think the individuals, like for example, to just taking cannabis users. So the publicly available data says there's roughly 35 million of us, and I think that number is probably more, right? But there are 35 million people that would essentially fail a drug test if they were ever given one, and if they were stopped by the police and suspected of driving under the influence, if any amount or a nominal amount of THC shows up in their system, then they're going to be charged with a cannabis DUI. And the numbers are pretty clear that cannabis DUIs and license suspensions are increasing in every single state. So the way that we look at it is that we have a population that is already exhibiting this behavior of cannabis use and is at risk every time that they drive their car. The way I think about it is essentially they're one mistake away from potentially having an interaction with a police officer that could lead them to be suspected of or accused of driving under the influence. So that's why we created this product as a way to protect against that risk. And we think that the model works because it focuses in on the individual behavior, what the person is actually concerned about, and excludes everything else that is not relevant to them. So we can keep the cost low and the benefit high.
That makes sense. And part of our issue with cannabis DUIs is that there isn't really a good system yet to check for intoxication. They're using blood tests. So someone like you or I that uses cannabis medically on a very frequent basis, we're always going to have some sort of THC in our system.
Right. And this is where it gets scary for a cannabis user, and I think it's an ambiguous and precarious situation. If you think about it, like the individual, if they have an interaction with a police officer, the police officer is looking for patterns, right? They're looking for behaviors. They're looking for something that they may say this person may be under the influence. And that can be the basis of pulling an individual out of the car. They also use questions that are designed to trick you up. I mean, Jeffrey, if I asked you, have you smoked today? What would your answer be?
I have consumed some cannabis today.
Okay, right. And if it was a police officer, like you may say, well, I may not, I haven't smoked today, or I haven't done that,
I haven't
right?
smoked. Yeah.
Right. You may say something like that, right? But even that answer can be the basis for suspecting that you are under the influence and asking you to step out of the car. And that in and of itself is just something that, like I said, an individual who has THC in their system, if they're in that situation and they are asked to be pulled out of a car, then it becomes this question of, can you perform a sobriety test? Could you do that with flashing lights and cars passing by you, and the stress associated with that? I hear stories almost daily, Jeffrey. People reach out to us on social media. I get connected through somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who's had a cannabis DUI, and the stories are all oddly similar. It starts with an individual. Do you know why? Or with a police officer, do you know why I pulled you over? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, and then it's immediately into questions about cannabis use, and from there it's a quick pull out of the car, and now you're conducting a sobriety test. And there is no test, like you said, other than police officers' perception to start the arresting process. So if you fail a drug test, a field sobriety test, and then my next step as a police officer is going to be to cite you, arrest you, tow your car, have it impounded, take you to jail, have you fingerprinted and ID'd, then have you submit to either a blood or a urine test, depending on the jurisdiction. And then whether or not you have to be bailed out or you're released on your own recognizance, then it's a waiting game. Then you're waiting for the lab to send the results to you. And depending on your state, like I said, if you have any amount or a nominal amount of THC in your system, that can lead to a summons to appear in court to face whatever charges may be awaiting you.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like it would be a potentially traumatic experience for some consumers. And I'm curious, did the idea for this concept start with this cannabis use case, or did you start with the overall idea and say this is the right place to start?
Well, no, I think it started with the cannabis use case, candidly, because of my own experience. My path of entrepreneurship is to look for things that are my own problems and then look for solutions out there. And if something doesn't exist, my hubris says, "Well, I can create that." And so that's led me on my entrepreneurial path to start these companies. And I started using cannabis at 22 and started getting serious about professional career around 25. And at 25 I had the thought that, whoa, I could get in trouble here real quick if I ever had an interaction with a police officer. At the time, Utah was a non-use state, and thankfully some of those regulations have eased up a little bit. It's a medicinal state, but it's a strict medicinal state. And we have laws here in Utah that just really don't make sense. Like, you can buy flower, but you can't smoke it. You can buy vape cartridges, and that's totally fine, and you can buy edibles as well. So why those laws exist the way that they do, who knows?
I mean,
Uh,
it's our political system and the mess that it is. Trust me, having tried to legalize in other states, I can tell you that it's a pretty ridiculous process.
yeah. And so the idea started with DUI coverage for cannabis users. But then, we realized that, hey, if this works for cannabis, this is going to work for other behaviors as well.
Got it. And one thing I saw, I forget where in the research I found it is, you said the criminal justice system has become overly influenced by money. I thought that was certainly an astute perspective.
Yes. Now I'm going to take off my CEO hat of Reefer and Behavior Labs for a second. I'm going to speak as an individual citizen. I think the criminal justice system is screwed up. I think it's a system that's become corrupted by money, and meaning that the people that have money have a different experience than those who don't. And I don't think that that's right. And I think that the only way to combat a system that has fallen into this money corruption trap is to combat it with money. And that's the main difference between what we're doing with Reefer and say a traditional prepaid legal plan that may give you discount legal services or access to a lawyer for a few hours. We think that what somebody needs in this situation is quick access to cash to pay the lawyer, cash to get the car out of impound, cash to pay whatever expenses come along with having to go through this process, making sure that you can get to work, get to the grocery store, get to pick your kids up. Like, there's real impact beyond whatever the criminal side of the outcome is. And that's the part that nobody really talks about, and that's how people end up in a criminal justice system that sometimes it takes them years to get out of. And I don't think that's right. So the thought was is, okay, when we build this product, what's the benefit that we're going to provide? And it was a very resounding: we're going to provide money to people in their time of need when they need it.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. And um, that kind of takes me to just kind of walking into a typical use case. So a customer is paying $15 a month, let's say. They get pulled over and charged with the cannabis DUI, blood tests, etc. What is their sort of next step in the process?
Great question. So if they're a Reefer member, then all they need to do is to log into the application, and they will submit their arresting and charging documents, whatever they was provided to them by the police officer, or by the discharge. And then we have them submit that documentation to through our platform, and they're assigned a claims representative that will respond to them within 24 hours. And then from there, if the individual was forced to submit to a drug test, whether it be blood or urine, we have our clients or our members go to a CLIA lab within 72 hours of being released, and get their own independent 8 panel test, and then they would submit that up to us as well. And then from there, we will release money up to $750 for the individuals that have completed the necessary steps. If they need that money, say, to get their money out of, or get their car out of impound. And then from there, as the expenses are coming up, like having to hire a lawyer, having to take time off of work, any of the alternative transportation, personal hardship, or incidental expenses that come up, then they just submit those through our portal, and then they are reimbursed within a few days from our claims adjuster. And currently, the money is sent to them via check, but very shortly we will be able to electronically deposit that money into their account, whichever that account may be.
And how long have you had active customers?
We don't yet, actually. We are
Oh, okay.
launching on May 16th in Missouri. So it's a very exciting
Awesome.
time to talk to you.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super exciting. And really glad you're going to be able to get this off the ground and get this going. And I think, you know, starting off in Missouri is going to be a great test case for moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think Missouri is going to be very interesting. It's a great dynamic of legal, or medicinal, and it also sits in a very interesting, part of the country where some states around it are illegal and some are legal. So I think it's going to be a very interesting test case to see who purchases the product, and also who is filing claims. Like, I know that insurance companies or companies that offer insurance type products would probably never tell you that they're excited to see a claim come through, but honestly, I am. I want to know who this product is really serving and benefiting. And my team has been building this now for almost 2 years, and it's exciting to see it come out into the world, and hopefully see the benefit that it provides to the community.
And you mentioned your team. I know you've built a really tremendous team. Anything in particular you'd like to share on them?
They are all seasoned entrepreneurs that have all had exits in their former companies. Some have had multiple exits, in fact. And these are all people that I have had the fortune of getting to know over the years. And I was in a pretty unique position when it was time to start this company to be able to go out into a pretty well developed network and pick who I wanted to help me bring this product to market. And I couldn't be happier with the team that I've built and with the dedication and work that they've put in to get us to the stage that we're at.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to see what you and your team are able to do going forward with this. And, um, certainly gave us some really good info on why cannabis is the right place to start. Something that stood out to me is the name Reefer. I mean, I'm curious. I mean, obviously, we know Reefer is a term for cannabis. Um, what was sort of the impetus for naming it that?
So it really comes down to the fact that one, I love that word, and two, I hate what that word stands for. And to me, it was a way to take back the word and redefine it into something that actually makes sense for what the product is, right? Like cannabis, marijuana, pot, the devil's lettuce, whatever you want to call it, right? It's got 100 different pejorative or slang terms, but reefer was really the one that struck a chord with America at the time about the negative effects of cannabis. And for me, it was a way to take back the word and start talking about the positive effects and how a company like Reefer can bring real change to the community and real benefit.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting choice. Just certainly connotates like the Reefer Madness era, like you mentioned. And yeah, I mean, I think that you have some work to do in taking back the word. I know you're spelling it a little bit differently, but or is that how Reefer is always spelled in this case?
No, the original spelling of reefer was Reefer,
That's what I thought.
and we chose Reepher because ph, right, medical, thinking that people, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch for people to replace the f with the ph.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. Well, I hope that it becomes synonymous with what you're doing.
Thank you.
One thing I really appreciated that you pointed out when we were speaking previously is just how much the verbiage that people use matters. Words like driving high and criminal or DUI defense. Can you speak a little bit more about the verbiage?
Sure. If you'll allow me, I'd like to just start off by saying the first off is that we do not encourage anybody to drive high, right? We're not encouraging our smokers and drivers out there, and you know who you are, right? What we're saying is to responsible cannabis users that consume cannabis in a way that is conducive with their lifestyle and allows them to live happy and healthy, productive lives, but at the same time also puts them at a significant risk every time they get behind the wheel. And so, our position is that what we are trying to do in our first kind of introduction of the problem and the product to the community is first educating the public that there is this problem, right? And a lot of people don't even know that it's a problem. They think that because they live in a medicinal or a recreational state that they don't have to worry about cannabis DUIs. And that in and of itself has been, I would say, a challenge and a learning experience for us to introduce the problem to the cannabis community. And then from there, it's introducing that there is a product that is designed to alleviate this problem should it arise. And so we've had to use a lot of language that first is focused on the education side and then the introduction of the brand and the product itself. And, throughout all of this, we have to be very careful, both from a federal standpoint and from our social media overlords, but also from a state law and regulatory standpoint about the things that you can talk about, advertise, show images of. That there's a lot that goes into walking that delicate line of talking about a behavior that people do, but by talking about it could potentially violate some law or regulation or statute somewhere. So it has been a challenge. We've definitely had a couple of speed bumps and some learning experiences along the way, but like any startup, it takes a little bit of dialing in and optimizing before you start to perfect the message and the medium for the message as well.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, you have a good attorney to help you sift through all that.
Charges by the word.
Yeah, I believe it. Um, so let's say that in the future we do get some better way of determining if people are intoxicated from cannabis versus if it's just in their system, in their bloodstream, like you and I have. Does that pose a potential threat to your business model?
I don't think so. I mean, it's definitely something, in the grand scheme of things that got to be aware of. But like, let's use Canada as an example, because I would say they're a little bit further along than the US in terms of roadside drug testing. Canada currently has a cheek swab, which is supposed to be able to tell if you've consumed cannabis and I believe cocaine within a certain amount of time. Okay, fine. So let's say that it tests positive in you, or tests negative in you rather, but the individual or the police officer says, "But I've given you, the eye test, the finger test. I had you walk the line. I saw you stutter. So I still think you're under the influence of cannabis, even if this roadside test says that you didn't test positive for it." In those types of situations, you have to think about, what is the police officer going to do? Is he going to let you go? Is he going to take you to jail? The data isn't really conclusive on that. What I can say is in Canada, what I'm seeing is, like, I just read an article the other day that said in Saskatchewan in 2020 there were like 70 license suspensions, and in 2021 there were over 600. So the numbers are going up. In the
Hmm.
U.S., beyond police officer perception, there are some innovative companies that are trying to get their programs through. Like, there's a company, I believe it's called Cognivue in New York, that is trying to get something passed that would basically put a video game in front of a or a suspected cannabis user, and they would have to perform tests on the road on like an iPad or something like that.
Hmm.
And, already lawyers are responding and saying that wouldn't be admissible in court. There are no other drug tests currently beyond blood and urine that are also admissible in most courts. So, it really still boils down to the fact that even if cannabis is legalized, decriminalized, taken off the schedule list, or even if there is better testing available, what's admissible in court is blood or urine. And so that's the path that the police officers are going to take you down if they suspect that you are under the influence.
That makes sense. It's going to be a lot of effort to get any other kind of testing admissible at any point. So,
Yeah. Which is tragic for the end consumer if you think about it, because
absolutely.
that means that before they ever even get charged with a crime, they're going to incur a significant amount of legal and life disruption expenses, all before they ever have their day in court.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough to think about. So I know this is cannabis use cases, kind of where you're starting. What are some potential future use cases for your customers?
Well, so beyond just DUI coverage, the next endorsement that we will be rolling out will be additional criminal misdemeanors. And so that will be possession and paraphernalia. We are also working on a family plan endorsement. So this would allow parents for kids age 18, as long as they have a medical card, up to age 26. So parents would be able to buy coverage for themselves and for their young adult children while they're away at school, or just starting off in their careers. And then we are also working on a CDL endorsement for commercial driver's licenses. So the program as it exists in its current form is great for real estate agents, rideshare, gig economy workers, self-employed individuals, as well as the regular cannabis consumer that potentially may have some risk exposure there that they would like to reduce with this type of product.
Right. And I know you mentioned that currently it's with DUIs, but obviously when you use that term, alcohol comes to people's minds. Can you just kind of give your perspective on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and in fact, that is the other endorsement that we're working on right now is an alcohol endorsement. Now, let me be very clear about something that I have no plans ever to roll this product out for DUI coverage for alcohol. And the reason is because the science is pretty clear, right? You know what alcohol does to your body in a certain amount of time. There's thousands of studies of it. Like there's no refute to have there. Cannabis is a completely different story because THC and other cannabinoids are fat soluble. So they're going to stay in your body long after any consumption. If you or I were to test in a say a zero tolerance state or something with like a 5 nanogram level, right? We would fail for weeks, if not a month, after we last consumed at any point in time that we were tested. And so that's why we went after cannabis use. Now, there is a use case, though, where we think that a responsible cannabis user may go out and have a drink sometimes, right? Like, so if I go to dinner and I have a glass of wine and I drive home, if I get pulled over, the police officer may have a suspicion of me driving under the influence of alcohol. And that would lead me to potentially
Mm,
be arrested. And if I were arrested and forced to submit to a drug test, if cannabinoids showed up in my system, then I'm going to get charged with a poly drug or a cannabis DUI. So the endorsement for alcohol would allow an individual to have up to zero point zero 0.02 BAC in their system at the time of testing, because we want to make sure that we cover our responsible cannabis users that may have a drink from time to time, but at the same time, we don't want to encourage individuals to say smoke and drive, because the compounding effects of alcohol and cannabis can be significant. And so it's a very delicate line of what we're willing to walk, and the risk that we as a company are willing to take.
yeah. Thanks for explaining that. That certainly helps. So it's come up a few times. You know how both of us have had cannabis be helpful in our lives, and anytime I have someone like us that is happy to talk about that, just am always interested in asking so the listeners can hear, how cannabis has been helpful in your life.
Hmm. Well, it's a love-hate relationship. Um, I I honestly can say, without cannabis in my life, there would have been some very, very dark times that I don't know that I would have been able to see my way through. Um, it has been a guide, a healer, a reprisal, a creative outlet. It has been so many things for me over the years, but really, I think above all else, what it's been for me is perspective. It's perspective on how my brain thinks, on the things that I tell myself, my negative feedback loops, my own struggles with self-image, or problems that may be amplified in my head but aren't necessarily apparent in my everyday life. um, it's helped me build stronger relationships and relate to people in ways that I don't know that without it that I would have been able to get to the place that I've been able to get to in my life. I think a lot of people are limited in their abilities because they listen to their inner thoughts, and they listen to the stories that they tell themselves. And cannabis has been a, a way for me to break free from that and to uh, look at life and look at things that are important to me and value them with an outside perspective, or an appreciation rather, for the things that I have in my life. It's a hate because like, I guess I would say that if I had my choice, if I didn't feel that I needed something to help with those types of issues in my life, that would be better, but like, I'm thankful that I have found a solution that has worked for me and has given me the freedom in my life that I believed that I was capable of achieving.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it, and certainly can understand the wishing not to have to rely on anything. But I'm glad it's been able to help.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
So throughout your work on TruClinic and with the University of Utah and Pando Labs, and as well as in your current endeavors, have any stories come up where you really just saw how much your work could affect change, and something that really opened your eyes to that?
Yeah, there's been a few, stories. In True Clinic, I think still to this day, my most favorite story was early on. There was a mother that had terminal cancer that was pregnant, and was able to give birth to the baby prematurely, but she had to be isolated in an intensive care unit, and the baby had to be isolated in another intensive care unit. And so what they did was they used TruClinic and two tablet computers. Shout out to Microsoft for providing those, by the way. That the mother was able to be with her child, using the tablets, and having a nurse there that was communicating with the mom and moving the tablet around to show the mom what was happening with the baby. And then afterwards, they just left the tablets there by the baby's and the mom's bedside, just so the mom could be with her baby. Um, that was that was actually one of the moments for me that, like, really made me realize that what I was doing, and kind of like the mission and the goal, was working. It still brings tears and sadness. The mom eventually passed away, but it was a heartfelt experience to watch happen and to see it all unfold. Um, with Reefer, and with Behavior Labs, I am really just starting to see it. Like, I knew that there's a market and that there's an opportunity, but I didn't know that people, when they saw what we were doing, would proactively reach out to say, "Hey, I want to tell you about my cannabis DUI experience." And this would have been so helpful for me if I would have known, or if it would exist, if it would have existed. I hear comments like, "I'm buying this for myself. I'd like to buy it for my family when it becomes available." And that has been just awesome. It's like the product isn't even out in the market yet, and people are already reaching out saying, "Hey, I need this."
Yeah, yeah, that's got to be a great feeling to know you're putting something out there that is really going to help people.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
In a similar vein, are there any experiences from childhood that stand out that showed you the importance of giving back?
Yeah, being around the VA, um, that was hard. Seeing troops come back, and seeing not just troops in the first Gulf War, but also seeing veterans from World War II and Vietnam, and living on grounds of the hospital, and being around active duty and veterans, you heard a lot of stories, and it definitely changed me as a young man in my beliefs about like what are the real costs of war, and what are the real the tolls that it takes on the people that are forced to participate in those types of scenarios. um it also made me really realize that there are a lot of people out there that don't have choice. They're forced into situations that are you know socioeconomic, are familial, are generational, are race based, and just bearing witness to seeing how people had to make choices to survive, or to attain, a certain lifestyle that they were looking to achieve. It made me realize that it takes all types of people to make the world go round. And whether it's blue collar to the boardroom, you know everybody needs help and assistance at some point in their life. And so I think about my path of entrepreneurship as social entrepreneurship. I think about it in terms of, if I'm going to put my effort into something, I want to make sure that it has an impact, that it's actually going to benefit people that are going to use the product. So that has really been a driving principle for me, and just how I think about business every day. I'm also an investor, and I look at companies all the time, and if the only goal is profitability, that's not enough for me. Like,
Yeah.
I need to know, I need to see the real impact that it's going to have.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And throughout your career, has there been anyone in particular that you've considered a mentor?
Yeah. A lot of people. I would just give some quick shout outs. Terrace Colf, Mark Browse, John Walker, John Hui, Avner Shore, Jim Horowitz, Christian Seal, J.C. Whitner. These have all been people in my life that have helped me from an entrepreneurial standpoint. But also from a people that have just been good to me, and been generous with their time, and have taught me things outside of the entrepreneur, mindset and ecosystem, but how to be a better human. Like, there are so many mentors and friends that I've collected throughout the years that have really helped me become the person that I am today. And I can't name all of them, but if any of them hear this, they'll know that I'm talking about them.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly find that with a lot of the most successful people, they tend to have a lot of people they've leaned on over the years and have that open mind of knowing you don't know what you don't know. It's important to lean on people with experience.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Briefly, to touch back on the creative endeavors, you talked about music early on, and then I know you've also done a short film. You wrote a book about your cat. I was just curious to learn a little bit more about those creative endeavors.
So I still love to DJ. I still dig for music every day. It's a habit. It'll die with me. But a few years ago, I started thinking about flexing some of my creativity and things that I've never done before. So it started off writing a children's book about my cat. I have a cat that is thinks she's a human being and does things like takes a shower with me every day. Has done this for 18 years of my life, every single day. And she's a talker, and she's got a lot of attitude and sass, and so it inspired me to write a book about her. And after writing the book, I talked to a friend of mine who teaches cinematography and documentary filmmaking, and kind of went over the story with him and what I was thinking, and he convinced me that we should make a short film. So we did, and it turned out I like it. I mean, if you want to see it and waste 5 minutes of your life that you'll never get back, you can go to indiethecat.com. It's INDI thecat.com. And like I said, feel free to watch it. It is 5 minutes of your life you will never get back. But
Can we get the book there too?
no, the book is not available yet. I still don't have it illustrated, but that it is a slow work in progress. But the plan is that when the book launches, that all of the profits that come from it will be donated to Planned Parenthood, and that if you are interested in donating, I think there's a GoFundMe link on there. But the movie actually got into the Palm Springs International Short Fest. Shout out to those guys for accepting it in. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was definitely something that hopefully I'll get to do more of in the future.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to check that out. And if you'd like, now you can ask a question of me.
So I want to know what inspired you and continues to inspire you to podcast.
Yeah, a few things. I started listening to podcasts in high school originally when they were a little bit newer, and I found excitement in the fact that I was spending the time I was driving learning. So that made me feel good. And then I, had some experience in broadcast, mostly for broadcasting junior level hockey, and it's something that I've enjoyed. And for better or worse, I guess I liked hearing myself talk. And uh, for me, it was a way to channel creative energy without having to deal with the barriers of Hollywood that I deal with in some of my other endeavors. It was something I could just make and put out there. And I knew I'd wanted to do something, and landed on Innovators and Social Impact. Just I've been fortunate to build a really strong network of people doing cool things that need to be highlighted. And so the fact that it's with great people doing really awesome things, I'm inspired by each of my guests generally, and it keeps me going.
That's awesome. I appreciate you allowing me to steal a moment of your megaphone to talk to your audience.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's been awesome having you. And a new question I brought on recently, thanks to a friend of mine. If everything ended tomorrow, what would you be most proud of?
On a professional level, I would say culture. Building a startup company is like building a relationship with a bunch of different people, and it takes a lot of finesse, but if you can get it right, you can make some amazing things that you didn't think possible happen. And having the opportunity to work with multiple teams and multiple just amazing people that I will forever be indebted to, um, that's been cool. On a personal level, um, learning how to get out of my own way, and to believe in myself and my abilities, and my small triumphs and small failures, but to keep having that faith that I'm going to be able to make my way through it. That was something as a child it took me a long time to develop and to be comfortable with. And now I'm in my 40s, and I finally feel like I can say, yeah, I'm comfortable in my own skin.
Yeah, I mean that's huge. So congratulations on that. And um, an important question I make sure to ask is one that I get really interesting answers to. We'll see. If you could snap your fingers, if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate?
Man, that's a good one. What would I change and how would it reverberate? I would say that probably the thing that I would change the most is insatiable greed. And the impact that I think that it would have is that if more people, and Elon, I'm talking to you, right, use their money to impact real change, whatever it would be, whatever they're interested in, I think that we would see some tremendous benefit that would pay dividends for decades and centuries into the future.
Yeah.
And the more we can see that, from leaders like Buffett and Gates and the like, the more that we can convince people that that's what they should do. I think that hopefully would provide real benefit that would reverberate throughout the world.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, I think there's so many instances, unfortunately, of greed in our society. When it comes to business, it's so interesting. For me, when it comes to business, I'm everyone that's involved. I want to have success. Why would I want to do this if I don't want everyone to be successful? And there's this pervasive, like, I want to win, I want to screw everybody kind of culture out there in some realms, and it's frustrating. And then it also comes up in things like all the misaligned incentives amongst businesses where, for instance, pharmaceutical companies are incentivized for you to continue to take their medication versus to cure you. And so you start to see those things piling up. I mean, the opioid epidemic has certainly been a stacking of greed.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
and you think about the effects of what has happened, to the country and to the world because of people's greed, especially, like, I'm not going to talk trash about pharmaceutical companies, but that's just one example of how insatiable greed, and where profit is purely the motive, can create negative effects for the people,
yeah,
for supposedly for who that benefit or that entity is supposed to serve.
yeah, 100%. Well, it's been great having you on. Certainly inspiring. And how can listeners support you and your impact?
Uh, I would love for every listener to first go to reepher.com. That's www.reepher.com. And first learn about what we're doing and how we're trying to help the cannabis community. You can sign up for our newsletter there. If you're in Missouri next week, you'll be able to start signing up for the product and actually be covered. And you can also follow us on our socials at Team Reepher, so TeamReepher.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll be sure to include those links in the show notes. And it's really been great chatting with you. I look forward to an update down the road as things progress with Reepher.
Jeffrey, thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk to you, and happy to update you anytime.
Thanks for listening to this episode of People Are the Answer. To find out more, go to peoplearetheanswer.com.